So apparently it's time. So yeah, I see waving through the spotlight, slightly giving us like an epileptic attack. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to JFall. It's our honor to present the session to you today. What I'm going to say before we start, all the slides will be available online. Actually, they already are. So just relax in your way too comfy seats and enjoy the talk. And I'm going to leave Eline to kick off this session.
Yeah. Welcome to our talk on leaving a legacy. We are going to talk a lot about legacy today. We're going to use the word legacy a lot today. So let's look at an example of a legacy. And what you see here is a book, a child holding a book filled with pictures. And these are probably pictures that the grandparents took years and years ago. And they are some kind of legacy that is left for the future generation. These pictures are something that is left for the grandchildren to look at, to see what life was like. But that's just an example of a legacy. Let's look at a proper definition. And I'm going to read it aloud. Something that somebody has done successfully and that has positive effects even after they retire or die. So it's really something very, very positive, really an achievement, and it even has impact, even though the person who did that thing is no longer here. And Tom and I, we thought of some people that we believe have left some kind of legacy.
So who did you pick, Eline?
Well, I picked Sir Alexander Fleming. And I don't know if everyone knows Sir Alexander Fleming, but he was a physician and a microbiologist who lived a century ago. And while doing a lot of research, he accidentally discovered a bacteria destroying mold that later on he would call penicillin. And maybe you have heard of penicillin, but if you haven't, it was one of the first antibiotics. So this discovery really paved the path for the use of antibiotics in modern healthcare, and it really saved lots of lives during the Second World War. So
literally leaving a life-saving legacy. Really? Now, the person that I selected was Sir Terry Pratchett. Are there any Discworld fans? Terry Pratchett fans? Yes, applause, my people. So for those that don't know him, Terry Pratchett is a fantasy author who actually gives commentary to the real world in like a sneaky fantasy satire way. And the reason that I listed him is he didn't literally save lives per se through medication, but whenever I feel down or I feel like I need a bit of an escape, I can pick up one of those books and just get transported into Discworld with all the crazy stuff that happens in there. So for me, he is really something that left something behind that's very positive. But we're here at the Java conference, so if there's one person that we should put up here as well, it's James. Because without James Gosling creating the Java programming languages, none of us would be here today, and none of you would be sitting in these, well, most of you wouldn't be sitting in these comfy seats. Sorry, people, to the side. So now you might be thinking, this is a lot of damn positivity in a talk about legacy. So we actually have another definition, because words are flexible. And the definition that I found was a situation that exists now because of events, actions, etc., that took place in the past. Now, I highlighted two words, and I'm going to start with situation, because situation is a pretty neutral word. There is a situation. But when you're on an aircraft and the pilot comes over the intercom and says, "Dear passengers, we have a situation," you don't actually expect champagne and caviar to come rolling down the aisles. It means we have a problem. So situation can be very, very negative. And the second thing that I highlighted there was in the past. So it already happened. There's nothing you can really do about it. And I was thinking, like, this is more what we think about when we think about legacy software, right? It's a situation that was created in the past. And I found a few years ago the perfect picture for me that signifies legacy software. It's this one. So let me tell you why I think it's perfect. In the middle, there's a rusty cube, a monolithic rusty cube. It could be an actual monolith. It could be Docker containers running Java 6. Around it, that's the water, that's the tears of all the developers that still have to work on the legacy software. And then the boat are, of course, the consultants running away. Well, floating away in this case. So I hear a few of you laughing, and I used to laugh as well in the beginning, but I find myself more and more in the category of people that has to keep building this, or that receives one of those cubes and please fix this for us. So to give a bit of background, I'm Tom Coles. I'm a consultant for InfoSupport. I know we have an office in Veenendaal, but we're both from the Belgian division. And I often go to brownfield projects to freshen them up and try to basically use the defibrillator and try to get them back to life. And I brought Eline today. And Eline, can you kind of explain what your role in all of this is?
Yes, my name is Eline Callens, and I also work at InfoSupport Belgium. But I work in the maintenance and the services team, so you can see all my tears right here from all the things we didn't want to receive. But
yeah, and we see more and more, and that's why I really wanted to do this session together with Eline, because I was often a person that had to hand something to Eline, and when I messed up in some way, or my code wasn't functioning, or I didn't document enough, then I literally could see on her face the effects that I caused to her. So that's kind of what we wanted to talk about today. How do you decently leave something behind for someone else? How do you leave a positive legacy? We have 3 topics, and actually we're going to start somewhere where probably none of you expected that we would start, and that's onboarding. And onboarding is pretty weird, because you think, oh yeah, you just join a new project, everything is nice. But given the definition that I showed you, a situation that occurred in the past, if that's a legacy, then actually when you join a project later in the life cycle, when you get onboarded, technically for those people that join your project later, it's a legacy software system. So that's why we start here, both onboarding of new people while the project is still going on and onboarding like a maintenance team. And yeah, normally when we onboard people, it's nice. You say, hey, welcome to the project, here's the code, check it out. But what is like the first task that we often give people? Anyone want to yell something? Documentation. Read the docs if they exist, so that's a good one.
Clone the repo, run the build.
Sorry, what?
Clone the repo, run the build.
Clone the repo, run the build, exactly. And once that's done, the first task, really, that's on the backlog, because clone repo on the build is probably not on your Jira.
So something simple, not urgent.
Something simple, not urgent. And often what I hear is, here is a simple bug or a simple thing, go fix it. But it's not always simple, is it, Eline?
no, it's not, because very often it kind of feels like this. You are dropped in the water, and they throw a life buoy at you, and you just have to swim behind the boat until you can catch up with all the rest of the team. Because they say this is a simple bug, but when you're new to a project, it's not always that simple. Now, why does it feel like you're drowning? Well, very often when we are developing software, we do it in some kind of loop. We do some actions over and over again. And I'll explain the actions to you. First, we take a little piece of the application, and we look at the...
One more.
One more? No. A little bit too soon. But then we look at the domain, and we look at the business logic. Which domain terms do we use, and what should we do with them? And then when we've decided what we need from the domain, then we make a concept out of it. Oh, and now he goes twice. So we make a concept out of it, so we will see how can we implement this. And then afterwards, if we decided that, then we can code it. And then we take another part of the application, we look at the domain, we make a concept, we code. Domain, concept, code, domain, concept, code. But when you're new to a project, and that project already exists, then there is already a lot of domain, there is already a concept declared, and there's already a lot of code.
Potentially for like 5 years, people have had the luxury of slowly iterating and slowly adding, learning a bit more about the domain, doing a bit more concept design, then typing a bit more code. But when you join a project, then suddenly you get a wave of all these things at once over you, and that can be very overwhelming and can feel a bit like drowning. Now, normal projects, like if you work as a consultant, those don't only suffer from this. in open source, we also suffer from this. And I don't know if anyone recognizes this. It's a label that they have been putting, the open source community has kind of got together and said, we need to get more people into open source. How can we do that? Well, we're going to label issues good first issue, and then we're going to tell to people, hey, if you want to pick up an issue and join the project, pick up these because these are good first issues. I've been looking at some of those. No PG bouncer with named prepared statements. I'll highlight it. It's a good first issue, right? If you've never seen this project before, anyone in this room can do it. And that's, I think, where we, as an industry, sometimes go wrong. We think it's a good first issue, while actually it's not even close to being a good first issue. It's maybe a good first issue for the developer that's been working on that for years on a Monday morning. Like, yeah, it's a good first issue on Monday morning. But that's quite different from a good first issue when you've never seen the code before, or it's your first contribution to the project. And it's not just for starter people that struggle with this, because Java champion Andres, who should be here, I don't know if he's in the room. No, not today. He literally said, sometimes you get an answer on your pull request saying, or your issue, PRs are welcome, but PRs are welcome is a hollow phrase. If you have an issue with a project and they answer PRs are welcome, but you've never actually contributed to the project, that's quite a lot they ask from you. So this is kind of the problem that we see with getting onboarded. So what could be one strategy to help your team, or when you're hosting an open source project, to make this a bit easier? It's actually when you have this loop, these three things, they're actually three separate things. We kind of mash them together in a thing we call a code source repository, including documentation. But if you hand something over to someone else, then it could be useful to just not mention or show one of these three. For example, a while ago, when I handed over software to Eileen, Eileen is historically a .NET developer, yes. and I had to hand over a Java project. So what we did was we had very focused separate sessions, first about the domain. How does the domain of this application work? Because if you don't know the domain and then you see code in a language that you're not used to, it just becomes too much. You can't process all of that. So if you explain something, if you get someone new in your team and you explain the code to them, the first simple issue, make sure that it's really simple and make sure that you explain it maybe in separate phases. To give the inverse example, when I was on a different project, there was a new starter who was pretty good. He actually already knew the domain because he worked at a previous company that did kind of the same, but he'd never worked with Spring Batch before. So what we did was we let him code a Spring Batch application, but with a domain that he knows really, really well, so he could just focus on learning Spring Batch. Because sometimes we mingle these things together and then it becomes just too complex. Now, one of your country fellows has created a book about this. Feline Hermans, Programmer's Brain, who's aware of this book? Quite a few. She actually lists a few activities that are more useful for people starting out on a project than immediately starting to code. So the first thing is exploration. Just say to a developer, here's the code base, go explore, report back what you find. Maybe they recognize a bunch of stuff, maybe there's a bunch of stuff that they've never seen before. Then try to get those new things out first so that you can explain. Second thing is searching, like saying, oh, we have implemented something that will send a mail, go find it. If they can't find the mail sending implementation, then it's good feedback. Maybe your source code isn't as readable as you expected it to be. Transcription, it's a bit of a special one, but instead of immediately letting them implement the method, write out in pseudocode. Take away all the struggles that people might have with the programming language in itself, and let them write it in pseudocode, and then afterwards use that pseudocode to implement the actual code. So these are incremental small steps. There's also comprehension. This is something that apparently ChatGPT is pretty good at, but summarize a specific method in natural language. Like if you have a very complex business method, a very complex domain, letting someone that comes into your project explain it in a natural language first and validate with a more experienced developer on the project, is this what this code actually means? could really avoid a lot of time wasting and bugs that will be created if you don't do this. And finally, of course, once they feel a bit more confident and they feel quite a bit more at ease, then you allow them, well, allow them. If they want to do it before, of course they can, but then you try to give them an implementation that they can do. But we talked about open source, so this is more within a project. How would that work for open source, Eline?
Yeah. If you have a good first issue, if you have a first issue for someone, what's a real good first issue? That's if you list the prerequisites, everything that you need to know to be able to solve this issue should be listed out. Also, you should make sure that there is a clear path to the solution. That can be either pseudocode or that can be just some small copy-paste stuff, but that it's really, really simple for someone that hasn't seen any of your code or that doesn't know what the code base looks like. And then a real contributor should be able to do this in approximately 10 minutes.
Yeah, and then that's kind of where it becomes a bit difficult, because if a contributor can do it in 10 minutes, why would they put all the effort into writing the pseudocode so it's easy for other people to do it? And I think that's the trick. The real good first issues are too easy for the main contributors, so they just quickly do it themselves in 5 minutes. But if you want to onboard new people onto your open source project or on your project as a whole, let them do that simple stuff first. Let them help them with pseudocode, like, oh, it should be approximately this. When I contributed to the JReleaser a while ago, Andres, from the slides, also creates JReleaser, basically told me, oh, you need to make adjustments in this file, this file, this file, it should be approximately this. So basically he wrote pseudocode for me, which made it a lot easier to do my first contribution to the JReleaser library. So these are like a couple of things that you could do. I would recommend reading Feline's book to get a bit more detail. But situations. I talked about these situations that we put people into. And in the end, situations that we put people into, if I write really crappy software and hand it to Eline, and Eline gets close to burnout, then that's actually on me. And if you think I am a bit excessive, sometimes it really feels like drowning in a swamp. If you get like a bunch of legacy crappy code and then you have to suddenly maintain it, it feels like this. Now, a while ago, when Twitter wasn't filled, X wasn't filled with chatbots or ChatGPT just writing tweets, there was some actual content. And one of the things that we used to do was ask silly things like, make a developer cry in 4 words. Anyone has 4 words that can make a developer cry? No? Don't worry. Oh, yeah. To do 2017. So for me, it was very simple. Undocumented, custom in-house framework. It's 4 words, huh? This is my nightmare. And I wasn't alone, because like 5 minutes after I tweeted that, I got a response from Trisha Guy, who works at Gradle now, saying, yeah, I believe I became great at what I do only because those were some of the first few years of my developer career. Imagine putting a pure junior developer in this position. So she got out of it, but imagine putting a junior developer in like this mess. Unfortunately, I don't have to imagine, because 2 of my friends crashed and burned, ending up in such a situation. And to kind of show you and make you feel, show you what that feels like, we're going to do a little role play.
Oh, I'm losing my. So, Tom.
Hi.
You've been onboarded.
Yes.
You've got the code running.
Yes.
I think it's time.
It's time. Can
Your
I?
first issue.
Oh, nice, nice.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Well. Yeah, you can start.
So where's the documentation?
Documentation.
It's
fine. Documentation?
Yeah.
Like, you mean written documentation?
Preferably digitally.
Well, you can just use me. I will be your documentation, so you can ask me anything.
And you'll always be available?
Normally, yes, but we've got a sprint to finish, so we've got a lot of things to do. So good luck with it. It's very simple. You'll be able to do it. I believe in you, Tom.
Okay, it's very simple. So when you're new on a project, it could be that you get a little bit nervous because you're not used to the code. It might be super simple for anyone else, but it could be complex. The documentation isn't always available because it's a human person. So yeah, this doesn't feel right. So you get just super nervous.
Okay, Tom, how's it going?
Oh, I'm happy you're here because I need your documentation wisdom. So could you help me with this little?
Yeah, I thought it was very simple. But
no, not for
okay,
me.
fine. Then let's do it together. Let's do it together. So if you just do this, but then
Okay.
And you just have to look at this clause and then this method and
But just this clause, this method, these
Yeah.
are like business concepts that I
Yeah.
don't understand. So could you help me with?
Tom, just take your time. Look at it. It's not that difficult, but unfortunately I don't have time. So
Okay.
well, if you don't know it, then just try asking ChatGPT or something. Okay? Good luck.
So when you're new on a project and you get this kind of asshole team lead, then it's kind of difficult because you're already nervous. And when you get really nervous and it doesn't get fixed, then you get more anxious every time. Because when nervousness builds, you get anxious, more anxious. It gets harder to focus because you're so doubting yourself because it's easy. ChatGPT could help me, but this piece of bleep code is not in ChatGPT, so even ChatGPT doesn't understand this. And as it gets harder to focus, eventually, yeah, you become less efficient and less efficient. And it starts spiraling into like a small loop where because you're less efficient, you get more anxiety, it becomes harder to focus, and it just, yeah. Gets harder until probably your team leader, eventually comes to you and says,
Yeah, Tom, I'm sorry, but you know Dave? It only took him like 3 months to be fully up to speed, and we're now like half a year later, and you're still,
Okay.
nowhere. Well,
Yeah.
we've,
yeah,
I don't get it.
When, as a junior developer, you get these kind of comments, and you just start spiraling and spiraling further and further away until one day you just snap and just have to sit down and can't take it anymore. And then probably your manager will come to you and say things like,
Well, Tom, I'm afraid I have some bad news. Well, we've looked into it, and we think you just can't keep up with the rest of us. You're not fully up to speed, and I'm afraid we're going to have to let you go. So, during our role play, I can imagine that some questions popped up in your heads. Like, for example, you might have thought, why didn't they just leave? Because I would leave. Why didn't they just leave this company? Because if I would be in their place, I would see that this is not normal, that this is not what it should be like. But you don't always have the luxury to leave. Some people are stuck financially, some people are stuck locally. And these people, they were juniors. This was their first job. They didn't know what it was going to be like, and they just thought, this is it. This is how it's like in IT. This is how it's like in this business, and I just have to keep swimming until I can catch up with the boat. And then you can ask yourself, didn't they escalate this? And yeah, well, they tried. But you know, as a junior, as someone new, it's very difficult to escalate something. Plus, well, they were juniors, and the other people, well, they managed just fine. The business didn't really see any problem because the product was there and it had been running for years and there was no problem. And other developers, they had no problem maintaining that code. So why would these people have problems maintaining that code? So they didn't see any problem, and then it's difficult to really escalate. And then maybe they were just lacking self-confidence. Of course, that's true. But who isn't lacking self-confidence once in a while? And if you are new to our industry and you don't feel very welcome in our industry, isn't it normal that you're lacking self-confidence? I think it is. But Tom, maybe we are asking ourselves the wrong questions here.
Yeah. So this story actually happened, so it pisses me off to no extent. Because I think everyone in that situation was asking the wrong questions. And I'll show you why. What did they do? What did they didn't have? And they really put it on my friends that burned out, and they basically said, yeah, you're just not good enough, just whatever. They made no attempt to onboard them decently, to hand over decently. So instead of asking why didn't they leave, why didn't they escalate, why didn't da-da-da, let's talk about what we can do as an industry to make it easier for people to be onboarded and part of our industry. So Ellen, you can start with this one.
So one thing we can do is...
Your clicker is being really annoying.
The clicker is not really working. But one thing we can do, and I know it's an open door, is provide documentation. Because imagine, if you look at this picture, imagine you have an IKEA nightstand and you buy it at the IKEA store and you come home and you unbox it and you see that there's no manual. Well, it will take you some time, but eventually you will have your nightstand. But imagine that you have like years and years of written code and you don't have anything to start from. Then it's just, you don't know where to start. It's just so much, and then it's very, very difficult as a junior on a project like that.
Recently you had a bit of an issue, right? You and Tom got sick?
Yes, indeed. Recently, well, just to give you a little background, we are a team of 6 developers, and there was a new project in our team, and only 3 developers were fully up to speed with that project. And one day, I got sick, and then my other senior colleague, he got sick as well. And the only junior that knew anything about it, well, he had an important training that he could not miss. So the 3 of us, we were gone, and we had production issues. And then, of course, I have a very good team, and they managed just fine, and so our customer was happy at the end. But the first thing I did when I got home was write all the documentation, sorry, when I got back at work, was write all the documentation that they should have used or what they needed when I was sick.
Yeah, you call it the sickness factor, like how many people can get sick before your project gets into issues. It's often also referred to as the bus factor, but I thought we had enough drama for today. So sickness, no dying people.
Yeah, so I want you to ask yourself, I want you to look at your own team and ask yourself how many of these people can get sick before it becomes a problem, how many of these people can get sick before, well, if anything happens, you don't know what to do.
So what should we be doing then?
So what we should be doing is put your docs in your repository so that it's next to your code. Why should you do that? Because of versioning and because of pull requests. So you can look at the version, but you can also do a pull request, which means that if you build a new piece of software, then you can add the documentation in the same pull request so that everything that belongs together is together. And you can also, your colleagues can also review what you've written in the documentation, and they can say, I don't understand it 100%, or you have forgotten this, and like that you build very, very good documentation. And it's also in Markdown.
Yeah, so just to clarify, because we had a comment last time we did this presentation, when we say put your documentation in your repository, it's not necessarily commented code or something, or comments in your code. It's literally in Markdown files, putting your documentation inside the repository. And what you can do then, if you use Markdown, is you can do the review process like anything else, but you can build a website out of it that actually is your documentation that business users can read. And the great thing about this is developers hate writing code, but if it's Markdown and you have to commit it and push it and use pull requests, you kind of trick their brain like, oh yeah, I'm kind of still coding, while actually writing the documentation.
Yeah, and also, please don't just only document the what, but also the why. Because how many times have you stumbled on a little piece of code and you were like, why is it built this way? And then you start refactoring and refactoring and refactoring, and then you stumble upon one line when you're almost there and you see, oh, that's why. So please also document that.
Yeah,
and I'm not allowed to say please, just document it.
Yeah. The first time we gave this session, Aline was like, please do this, please do that. I'm like, no, just do it. Just do it. So the way that you typically can document decisions is using architecture decision records, ADRs. So this is just a very lightweight format in which you document your decisions. And a decision, such a record, has a few aspects. It has a status. Has the decision been proposed? Is this something that's been proposed, or is it final, approved? Some context, because you never make decisions just because you make a decision. You make it in a certain context, so that makes sense. The decision itself, for example, we will use Spring Boot because all our developers know Spring Boot. Rationale and consequences. So the rationale is all our developers know Spring Boot. Consequences are we're kind of stuck with Spring. And then, and I find this one actually the most important, discussed and discarded alternatives. Why do I think that's important? One, it will show people that you actually thought about it and not just after the fact writing a decision. And two, if your decision turns out to be a bad one, the path you've taken, you already have the alternatives that you discussed. So you can kind of branch from there. Now, documentation writing is kind of difficult, but I'm going to just show you one slide. It's overwhelming, but the only thing I want you to remember is Arc42, because Arc42 is kind of a template on what you should and could be documenting, from goals, scope, solution strategy, to even stakeholder management. And this is a free template that's online. They have even a Markdown ASCII doc generator to make a website out of this. So that's very interesting to have a look at. We do have to watch our time a little bit. But next thing I want to talk about is frameworks. Because you're at a conference, and at conference, we like short, snappy things. Because when you go to a conference session, you usually forget about 90%. You only remember 10%. What are the things we remember? Short and snappy. And what are the short and snappy things we remember? KISS, keep it simple. And YAGNI, you ain't going to need it. Those are abbreviations that you often hear in conference sessions. Now, the problem with that is that people will use those abbreviations and mutate them in a way that's super weird. I had someone actually say this to me. We did not use a framework because we're not going to need it, and we're going to keep it simple by building something ourselves. What? So they implemented the templating engine, which of course we have like 4 variations of with FreeMarker and TimeLeaf, but they decided to build their own. And once the requirements become more complex, their own custom-built implementation, it actually doesn't fit anymore, so they just hack it in until it becomes so bad that they can't even convince business anymore, because business has given you so much time to build this template engine yourself that they just say, yeah, now you have to keep rolling with this one. Too bad. So what I want you to think about is, before you ever write something yourself, check if there's established libraries and frameworks for this. I have been on a project where I found 3 templating engine implementation custom built. 3. None of them worked decently. We replaced them with TimeLeaf and worked perfectly. Be careful, because sometimes we make things way too complex. So if something has a less complex solution, then try to go for that one. Keep it appropriate. Don't use microservices for CRUD applications when you don't need to scale and such. Use them when you need them. And use server-side rendering if that's good enough. Limit the knowledge stack. If you hand something over to someone else and there's only one framework, they can probably Google that entire framework. If you have 50 different tools, new developers need to know all those 50 different tools. And you can see this going wrong when we suddenly need to have a separate tester because only the tester understands how the testing framework works now. And then we have a separate DevOps engineer, separate ops engineer because only he or she understands how to deploy to Kubernetes. So we need to be careful with this knowledge stack. And for the love of God, if you build something yourself, keep to standards. You can't imagine how many times I've gotten a 200 OK from the server to get in the body a 400 batch request. It's just... So use frameworks. Now the cool thing about conference talks and conferences is that there can be conflicting opinions between speakers. So I highly recommend you to go to the opposite case, the case against frameworks by Jan Hendrik in room 6. You don't have to believe me, go to his talk to see the opposing side. Luckily, sometimes you get to work on a greenfield project.
Wow.
Yeah, occasionally. And you know what's really cool about a greenfield project? You can build it, you can craft it, you can have like a nice little deliverable with hearts on it. Then you can give it to the maintenance team and you go, here you go.
Thank you.
Beautiful, isn't it?
It's so beautiful.
Beautiful software we created.
Yeah, wow.
You can maintain this now.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And that? What's that?
Oh, don't pay attention to that.
Yeah, but what is it?
Oh, this thing.
Yeah?
This. Oh, right. Yeah, this is our defect bucket.
There are defects.
Yeah. Well, there are, and because they're your problem now, so. So this is a very visual representation of what we. Okay. This is a very visual representation of what we sometimes do. We build a project. If you have a maintenance team, you pretend like, oh, look, it's nice and fancy and it looks good. And then somewhere there's a bucket full of defects. And honestly, I've seen people actually do this in Jira. They have their backlog, but next to the backlog, they have the defect bucket or the defect backlog. And we think, yeah, we'll get to that. But we lie, because it's the defect trash can. We will never get there until someone accidentally discovers it. Yeah. So what I want to say is, if you hand over software, be careful that you don't hand over a broken system. Because I think you've heard about the broken window pattern. If things are broken, people will do the same broken thing. So deliver quality software so that the maintenance team can see what the quality is and do the same thing. Because I've seen maintenance teams that basically copy what the development team did, even though it was a horrific idea. But then at least it's consistent and it works. So be careful there. So what should you be doing? Keep technical debt out in the open. It's just fair, it's honest. Do that. Monitor and improve your code quality as much as you can. And use tools like Renovate to keep your dependencies up to date. Renovate can automatically check in Maven Central if there's new versions of dependencies and make a pull request. So really spend some time to look into those tools to keep your things up to date, so you don't have to do it manually. But then there's another definition. To me, legacy code is simply code without tests. Now, honestly, I don't mind, and I need to be careful here, I don't mind software without tests that much. What I mean with that is, that's obviously bad. If you have projects that have tests, but the tests actually don't test anything because they mock away everything, that's not as obvious that it's bad. Completely no tests? Clear. There's no tests. I'm not maintaining this junk. If there are tests, it becomes a bit more tricky. Are these tests actually proving what I expect them to prove? So what are some things that we could do to improve our test, Aline?
What we could do to improve our tests is use mutation testing. Then you can see if you mutate your tests and they all still succeed, and then there's something wrong. So please use, no, not please, do use mutation testing. Make your tests as realistic as possible. So make sure you use WireMock, contract testing, or test containers, so that it's a real-life situation and that you can see that your code does what it should do. But then, if you're like me and you're in the maintenance team, then there always will be a day where your client calls you and says, everything's broken, fix it now. And there are some things that you all could do to help the maintenance team succeed. First of all, sometimes it's
Yeah, sometimes doubles it.
sometimes it doubles. But then the first thing you can do is use ubiquitous language. If the customer talks about something and he uses some domain terms, please use the same domain-specific terms in your code so that we know that we're talking about the same thing. So very often it's translated or they use a different word, and then as maintenance team, it's not always that easy to see, is it the same thing? Are we talking about the same thing? So this is really helpful if you use ubiquitous language. Yeah, I'll just leave it there. I know it's an open door, and I've already told it, but please add the documentation. And then provide a stakeholder list. If there are third parties that you work with, and these people could help the maintenance team when there's something wrong with, like a third-party thing, then make sure we know how we can call them, or how we can email them, or how we can make a ticket in their ticketing system. I don't know. But
important note there, the development team is also a stakeholder in the project. So if you're really badass and really confident, then you leave your phone number in the documentation. I've done that. They have not called me. What?
Why have two teams?
What do you mean, why have two teams? Sometimes I don't have a choice. I'm a consultant. Sometimes they hire me to build a project, and then it gets maintained by people from the customer. So I don't always have the choice.
No.
But even if I hand it over to someone else, or I stay on it for longer, I'm very happy, even for myself. I don't have the phone numbers of everyone in my head. It's just, these are all good things to have, even if you don't hand it over to literally another team, but to new team members that join the project.
Another thing you could do is add logging. When something goes wrong in production, it's always very nice if we can see in the logging what goes wrong and where we should look, and so that we can easily fix it. I know it's also an open door, but please do, because very often we see that there's very few logging. But these are all things that really help us out, if the client calls us. But I don't want my customer to call me saying that there's something wrong with my software. I want to know that there's something wrong with the software before my client does it, and I want to call him saying, hey, we know that there's a problem, but we're looking at it, and we're fixing it, and we're keeping you up to date. So when you have production software, add monitor alerts, so that when there's something wrong in your software, that you get an alert, and that you can say to your client that everything will be fine, and that you will fix it.
This also means that if you implement monitoring alerts and you write crappy software that you hand to the maintenance team, you are physically calling the maintenance team awake with your code. So be very mindful of people's sleep.
So, and then the last thing that you can do, or that you should not do, something that's very, very personal for me. The worst thing in the world is the following. Manual deployments. Please, no, not please, just automate your deployments. Because we have this client where basically we have to send an email to say, hey, will you please deploy this version of this service with this configuration? And every time it goes wrong.
And we assume that they type over the configuration because sometimes there's a typo in the actual configuration that got applied.
Yeah, so it's
nightmare.
It's really my nightmare. So very happy that you've all seen it, and I hope you all will automate your deployments. So do automate everything, and don't do it for yourself only, but do it for your team, because it causes less burnout and higher job satisfaction. according to the book Accelerate, so a book here.
Yeah, it's really scientific driven. If you've never read it, it's actually quite good and explains quite a lot of how things are related to each other. For example, it makes a direct connection between automatic deployment and burnout, and it really states the correlation that it found in the research. So if you've never read it, it's a really thin book, but it contains a lot of valuable information about our industry. So what we've been talking about legacy within a project. So now let's move beyond the project, because we have 5 minutes left, and that's where we want to end. What can we do beyond the single project?
Well, our code is becoming more and more complex, and our industry is becoming more and more complex, and also the things we leave to software are becoming more and more complex. So we have to do everything that we can to make sure that it will be a success.
Yeah, and mainly we need to set up other people to be successful. And I saw that this was also part of one of the keynotes. We arrived a bit later. But really guide other people to build good software. That could be teaching at universities. It could be teaching your colleagues. It could be basically anything. Mentorship is a really big part of what can help our industry forward. Because you don't want people to just suffer behind their laptops and have a lot of stress when they can be helped by just having a simple chat. How is this going? How is that going? So really try to guide people in our industry, in your company, and outside it. This is one of the reasons why I took over the Belgian Java user group, because I want to help guide people and help them move forward. Build some helpful tools. Think, most of us are really glad that there's something called Apache Maven by now, because that really helps building the software and running our tests and so on. So, and it doesn't even have to be that big. I saw him in the room before, but I think he left. Jan has built something to test if your equals method is actually implemented correctly. It's a really helpful tool because we just put these Lombok annotations on top of it, but the Lombok annotation has a few bugs in it if you're not careful. When you run it with this test framework, he actually catches it. So build helpful tools that can help other developers. Most of all, lift up others. Try to share as much knowledge as you can. If you want to learn more, there's the Test Automation University, which gives great courses on basic Java to testing with Playwright and Selenium. And one of my personal favorites is codingcoach.io, which is a website where people can register and say, I have some time during the week, I am willing to coach someone. And then someone else can come and say, I want to be coached. It's basically, I called it a non-creepy Tinder for mentorship. But you get the deal, right? You get the deal. All right, so that's it. Lift up others, mentorship, and just build useful stuff that can be used by other teams. So, Aline, the things that I know what you might be thinking, isn't all of this just being a professional developer? Isn't this just professionalism, Aline?
You can say that it is professionalism, but professionalism is a form of kindness. People often think that they have to choose between being professional or being kind, but that's not true. You can be both at the same time.
Yeah, so as we're out of time, we'll start our closing statement. So basically what we wanted to say to you is be kind. It's a weird statement to make at the end of a talk, but from what we've shown you, it's both kind and professional can work together. And don't leave developers behind on a rusty cube like this with tears that form a river like this, but leave a legacy that's worth remembering. That's the end.